Good morning and welcome to Rose Red Homestead. Today we are going to do a dry soup mix. It is called Creamy Hungarian Mushroom. So I'm quite excited about it, and it's going to be using the mushrooms that we both dehydrated and freeze dried in a recent video. Now this will go directly to food security and to emergency preparedness, which is what our channel is all about. So this one will be shelf stable for at least a year and probably longer. And I'm going to do something just a little bit different this time when we make up this soup mix, and I'll tell you about that in just a moment when we come back. Generally, when I prepare a dry soup mix, it takes quite a while. This one did too, of course. I go out all over the internet and look at regular soup recipes. I have found very few dry soup mixes online that I would be comfortable using in our food storage. So I just make my own, and I do it using a combination of recipes that I find in various places all over the internet. So it takes a while looking through various recipes and combining this piece and that piece and the other piece to put together something, and then converting it from wet foods into dry foods so that it will have a long storage life. However, this time I happened to find one in a newspaper. In fact, it just popped right onto my phone. So I think we were living right to have that happen. It is called Hungarian Mushroom Soup Recipe, a creamy mushroom soup recipe exploding with flavors. And it is by 30 Second Foods. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the link to this one as it is in the original, which requires everything fresh. I had to convert this one over to dry, so I'm going to give you the link to the original, and because I used this almost exactly as is except with my conversions to dry, then I will also be posting my conversions to dry, and you'll be able to see how I work to convert something that is in a wet mix over to a dry mix. Now this one calls for more soup than Jim and I could eat in a decade. Well, not quite. More soup than Jim and I could eat in a week. And so I've also cut it in half. And this time what I'm going to do, I have not made this soup. So this is the process that I go through when I'm preparing to do a video. Generally, I do a test on the recipe before we do the video. But since I'm using this recipe in its entirety, I'm going to make it exactly like I have converted it. We're going to taste it, and then if we need to make any adjustments, we will. And the final version of the dry mix that will go on underneath the video will have any changes that we make. Here is a jar of our freeze-dried mushrooms and our dehydrated mushrooms. I decided in this recipe I want to test both to see how they do, and that way we can learn about that as we go. So the recipe that I've converted calls for 1 cup of these dried mushrooms. So I used a half a cup of these. I chopped them up just a little bit first. These seem to be larger, and a half a cup of these. And also I used a half a cup of my dehydrated onions. These are my Walla Walla onions. These are the last of my Walla Walla onions, and so Jim is starting to watch in the stores for the appearance of Walla Wallas, because I need to do another great big batch of those this season. So that is what is in this bowl. And with all of my reading on using dried mushrooms in recipes, the ones I was most impressed with always say to rehydrate these mushrooms for about 30 minutes before you use them in the recipe. Now, I'm going to be draining the liquid, but I'm going to save the liquid. That liquid is phenomenal. So I don't want to lose that liquid. I want to, in fact, use it in the soup. Now, I started with 3 cups of that liquid, and I spilled some. It looks like I am left with 2 cups plus whatever I spilled, probably about maybe a fourth, not quite a fourth of a cup. So I'm draining this mixture right now. And look at the beautiful color of the draining water. We definitely want this in our soup. The original recipe calls for wine. Well, I don't do wine, and so I'm going to use this instead. All right, now, there will be a couple of things in this recipe that we're not going to include in the jar as we dehydrate it. And so one of those is I'm not going to put any ghee in the jar. And so that's one thing. A little bit of flour we'll need to also not include in the jar, and then some soy sauce. So those things you're going to have on hand. So I'm putting about 3 tablespoons of ghee right into our pan. And this ghee is melting. I'm going to let it get good and melted here. While we are waiting for the ghee to get smoking hot, I wanted to show you that after 30 minutes, this is what one of the dehydrated mushrooms looked like. Still fairly thin, and I tasted it, and it tasted just fine, but it's very thin. This is a freeze-dried one, and it seemed to rehydrate just a little bit better, not quite so thin. All right, this is ready, and we are going to then saute these veggies. We're going to keep it on low, and we're going to do this for about 10 minutes. So we'll be back when these are done. I wish you could be here to smell this. It is marvelous. I wonder, can you see these veggies okay? Also, I just want to let you know we're using this butane little stove, but we have our safety features intact as well. There's our carbon monoxide portable alarm, and we have the back door cracked just a little bit. Now the next step is to start simmering these ingredients. They're nicely browned, they're beautiful. So I'm going to put in 2 cups of the soaking water. Some recipes caution that if you did use the soaking water, to watch very carefully, because at the bottom there might be some dirt from the mushrooms that has gone to the bottom. And it looks like there is some kind of solid there. Not sure if it was dirt, but I don't want that in the soup. It might be just little mushroom pieces, but I'm not going to take a chance, so I'm going to dump that. And then an additional 2 cups of water, hot water. When you make the soup, if you don't have 2 cups of the soaking water left, then just add a little bit more. So we need a total of about 4 cups of water in here right now. And I'm going to put in a large bouillon cube that will give us 2 cups of broth. So you would either put in one of these large ones or 2 of the smaller. Chicken bouillon, you could use veggie bouillon if you preferred. I suppose you could even use beef if you wanted. So I'm going to just crumble this up a little bit and drop it in. We're going to bring this to a simmer. In addition, we are going to add our spices. And this is very easy. This is part of that amazing flavor that the recipe talks about. We are going to be using, I'm going to put in 1 teaspoon of dried thyme, 1 teaspoon of dill, dried dill. This ingredient kind of surprised me, so I'm going to be interested to see how this tastes. And 1 teaspoon of paprika. Now it just calls for paprika. However, I am so fond of smoked paprika, and I thought it just sounded great for this recipe, that I'm going to use smoked paprika. But if you would prefer to use regular paprika, that would be fine. And then last of all, it calls for some lemon juice. Now, you could use just lemon juice if you wanted to. You'd have to add that after you opened up the jar and not put it in the dried portion because, of course, it's wet. The other day I noticed that I had 3 lemons that were just about ready to turn. So I quickly sliced them using my mandolin and my hand protecting glove, and I dehydrated 3 lemons worth of sliced lemons. And I'm going to put 3 lemon slices that have been dehydrated in here just to lend that lemon flavor. And that is going to lift the flavor just a little bit. And then the other ingredient that we put in this simmering part is 1 tablespoon of soy sauce. And feel free to use the reduced sodium if you would like. Again, this does not go in the jar with the dried ingredients. You will add that later. Okay, we're going to just bring this now to a boil. Oh, it's looking really good. And we're going to let this simmer for about 15 or 20 minutes. We want it to simmer on low. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. Those mushrooms still need some more rehydrating and to soften up a little bit so that they're not rubbery. And we want that lemon to seep into the soup as well. And so here it is. Can you see it?
Yeah.
It's really smelling good. It's smelling a little bit different. I can smell the dill. Okay, we're going to let this simmer, and we want to reduce it by about between 1/3 and 1/2. So we'll be back when we're ready to add the last of the ingredients. Jim and I took a little sneak taste of the broth while it was simmering. Oh my gosh, this is fantastic. The flavors are so surprising and yet delicious. So we have 2 more ingredients that we need to add. First of all, we need to add the powdered milk because this is a cream soup. Now, if you wish and don't want to make this a cream soup, you can certainly leave the milk out. And also it will have sour cream at the end, and so you can leave that out as well. This calls for 3 tablespoons of dry milk powder, which if we would reconstitute it, it would be about 1 cup of milk. So I'm just going to put in 3 tablespoons. And we will whisk this around. Well, that was a mistake. I will certainly put a correction in the recipe or a better method of how to do that. I've done that before so many times and it didn't act like that. But there was something maybe about putting it in a hot liquid. Usually it just melts right into the liquid. Here is how I fixed that. I fished all the little lumps out, and then I put them in a separate bowl with a little bit of the liquid, and I used my immersion blender to blend everything together. And now it looks about like it's supposed to. So here we have it. I wish that the mushrooms floated, but they didn't because they would look so good if they were on the top. Now we need to make a decision about whether or not this is thick enough or whether we want to thicken it just a little bit. Jim, what do you think? Would you like it to be a little bit thicker? I think I would.
I would.
Okay. So here's how we do that the right way. So we are going to fish a little bit of the liquid out, not taking any mushrooms with us, just the liquid. And then I'm going to add about 1.5 tablespoons of flour. And I'm going to whisk that up, make it all smooth with no lumps. So here we have it. This is our thickener, just like we would do gravy, only not so much flour because I don't want it as thick as gravy. And we'll bring that to a boil, and then we'll see if that's thick enough. All right, what do you think? Do you want it thicker?
Yep.
I figured you would. All right, I'm going to take some more of the liquid. And add another tablespoon and a half of flour. That, I think, is perfect, and the mushrooms are now closer to the surface. So that is great. This is looking wonderful. And so then the last thing that we do, the final touch, is to add some sour cream. And again, I'm not going to take any chances. We add, this is sour cream powder, and I made this in my freeze dryer. If you do not have a freeze dryer, you can certainly buy this sour cream powder. That's what I did for years before I got our freeze dryer, because you can't do it in your dehydrator safely. I'm using 1/4 cup of the powder, and I put a little bit of water in this little bowl first, a couple of tablespoons, and I'm going to mix it up as well because I don't want any of those awful lumps. Adding a little more water so that it's more like the consistency of a wet sour cream. And again, if you don't want the dairy, you don't have to put it in. Oh my goodness. This is just looks fabulous. Wow. The mushroom is certainly there. The dill, the paprika, and the thyme have blended for quite a different flavor. Jim, do you want to come around and get a taste, or can I hand you one across and let's get your opinion? So I hope you heard Jim say that was very nice, so he likes it as well. So this, I think, is a success. The taste is fabulous. I don't think it has enough mushrooms in it. And so I'm going to add an extra 1/2 cup of mushrooms to the recipe when I put it online. So, but that's about the only change that I am going to make. Everything else, that taste is phenomenal.
And you need some more salt and pepper.
Yes, I think it does need salt and pepper, but that would be to taste.
Yep.
So, okay. So what would it look like in a jar? Well, I have tried that out this morning before we started because I wanted to know whether it would be suitable for a pint jar or a quart jar. And now, especially if I'm going to be adding another 1/2 cup of mushrooms to this recipe, it will take a quart jar. And it takes separating things out just a little bit. And so this is the spice packet with the 1 teaspoon each of the paprika, the thyme, and the dill. This is the 1/4 cup of sour cream. And this is the 3 tablespoons of powdered milk. These need to be kept separate. Now, I love these little single serving things. I use these all the time when my grandchildren come over. I make Jello shots out of these. They're fun. The kids love them. But you can also use snack size baggies, the little small, narrow baggies for each of these instead of putting it in a jar. So right now in this jar I have 1/2 cup of onions, 1 cup of mushrooms, 3 slices of dehydrated lemon, and the bouillon cube. So I am going to add another 1/2 cup of mushrooms to this jar. So we now have 1.5 cups of mushrooms as the mushroom base. And then we will put in these 2 containers and the spice container, and we would vacuum seal this. And the vacuum sealing would only take care of everything that's loose, because the vacuuming won't get inside these, and that's just fine. The other thing that you could do if you put them in sandwich bags is that you could put the whole thing in a Mylar bag and vacuum seal it in a Mylar bag as well. So I already have ideas in mind for other ways that we can use this soup, and I'll be doing at least one more video on that as well. So I hope that you have enjoyed this. I hope it gives you an idea of something that you can do with your dehydrated mushrooms that is a little bit different, and according to the recipe, is exploding with flavor. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.